investigation is like a puzzle.
This can't be real.
2 law enforcement agencies investigated piece by piece the death of Tamla Horsford. Both concluded she got so drunk at a party she fell from a balcony after everyone else had gone to sleep.
Just drinking, and we played cards against humanity.
But her family insists that narrative doesn't solve the puzzle.
You get all this information and you go, wait, nothing makes sense here.
Ralph Fernandez, the attorney for Tamla's husband, says he's gone through the evidence, every interview, document,
Tamla
and
Horsford
scene
wasn't
photo.
supposed to die that night. She had come to the party to celebrate, to laugh, drink, play games. It was her friend's birthday. It was supposed to be harmless. It was November 3rd, 2018. The air in Forsyth County, Georgia, was cool, the kind of fall evening where fire pits glow and conversations stretch into the night. The home belonged to Jean Myers, a large, comfortable 2-story house tucked in a cul-de-sac. Inside, the scene was suburban and serene. Wine glasses, snacks, chatter, and laughter from a group of women, mostly white, mostly mothers, like Tamla. Tamla was 40, a mother of 5, and full of energy. She was the kind of woman who showed up at every football game, who danced in the kitchen while making breakfast. She was also black, the only black woman at that party. But to those who knew her, that wasn't something she ever seemed to carry with tension. She lit up rooms. She cracked jokes. She gave hugs that made you feel like home. The party was casual. Pajamas were encouraged. Drinks flowed. They played cards against humanity. Photos were posted to Snapchat and Instagram. In every one, Tamla is smiling, holding her cup, alive. But by 7:30 a.m. the next morning, she was dead. Her body was found face down in the backyard, sprawled out, arms at her sides, palms upward. Her head pointed away from the house. The grass was wet with dew, her skin already cold. The official story, the one authorities told quickly, was simple. Tamla had been drinking heavily, stepped outside to smoke a cigarette sometime after. Everyone else had gone to bed and accidentally fallen from the second-story balcony. It was ruled an accident. Case closed. But nothing about it made sense. Not to her family. Not to the private medical examiner. And not to the tens of thousands of people who would later demand answers online. Tamla Horsford had injuries inconsistent with a simple fall. Her wrist was broken, but also dislocated. She had deep abrasions on her face. Cuts. Bruises. Her heart had hemorrhaging. Her neck had trauma. And most chilling of all, her death had been ruled as having occurred without the natural response to a fall, defensive wounds. There were no signs that she had braced herself. The sheriff's report said she had likely fallen over the balcony railing while intoxicated. But the railing wasn't that low. It was 14 feet high and solid. For someone to accidentally tumble over it, they'd have to climb or sit precariously on the edge, and Tamla wasn't that kind of woman. She was careful, athletic, graceful. She'd spent years chasing toddlers around the house. She wasn't reckless. Then there were the partygoers, a strange cast of characters with oddly scripted statements, coordinated timelines, and a strange silence when things didn't add up. They said Tamla had been last seen at around 1:45 a.m., going outside to smoke. The next morning, one of the party guests, a man named Jose Barrera, Jean Myers' boyfriend and a former probation officer, claimed to have found her body around 7:30 a.m. in the yard, but instead of calling 911 immediately, he walked back inside, consulted others, and then finally made the call. On that call, his tone was calm. Too calm. He described the scene almost clinically. He said she looked like she might have fallen from the balcony. But then he added something. Strange, she's not breathing. I've checked her. She's stiff, he said. Stiff? At 7:30 a.m., barely 5 hours after the alleged fall? That would suggest Tamla had died much earlier, hours before anyone supposedly noticed she was missing. And then came the second blow. Jose Barrera, the one who made the 911 call, was later fired from his job in law enforcement for using his credentials to access Tamla's death records illegally. Why? What was he trying to hide? Tamla's family, particularly her husband Leander Horsford, was relentless. He didn't accept the story. He had seen her body, the injuries, the bruises, the absence of defensive trauma. He described her wrist as shattered, her neck as battered. He hired a second independent autopsy, And that's when the cover-up theory exploded. The second autopsy changed everything. That Tamla's family had her body exhumed weeks after the funeral. The private pathologist they hired was not just anyone. He had decades of experience, had worked with high-profile cases, and knew how to detect signs missed or ignored. What he found contradicted the original autopsy in more ways than the Horsfords were prepared for. Yes, she had injuries consistent with a fall, but not just a fall. She had blunt force trauma to her head, a laceration on her heart, a dislocated wrist, and a crushed vertebra, cuts on her shins and arms, abrasion marks on her face and chin that looked like they came from a struggle, not a fall. And the most disturbing detail, there was no grass or soil embedded in her skin, no pattern on her face that matched the yard she supposedly fell into. It was as if she had been placed there. The private examiner's conclusion was careful, not accusatory, but firm. The cause of death could not be definitively ruled an accident. He used a term that sent shockwaves through the case. Homicide cannot be excluded. The Horsfords knew what they had always felt. Tamla didn't fall. Something happened that night, and someone in that house knew. The people at the party, 10 in total, mostly white women and 2 men, had offered statements to police that were eerily similar, almost rehearsed. They all said Tamla had been drinking but was happy, not out of control. They said they didn't see or hear anything unusual after they went to bed. They described her as the only one still awake, still watching football, still wanting to smoke one last cigarette. Then they said she must have gone out the back door and just never came back in. But here's the thing. The back door had a loud chime when it opened. No one reported hearing it. The balcony was just outside bedrooms. No one reported hearing a fall. No thud. No scream. No noise. Not until morning. There were also multiple cameras in and around the house. But most of the footage? Gone. The homeowners said the security system had malfunctioned at Tamla's phone, taken by the police and held for months. Her family never got to see her final messages, and one of the most suspicious pieces, a bruise on her chest that looked like it had been made after death, as if someone had tried to revive her or disguise the timing. More questions than answers, and no one talking. Then came the social media storm. A year passed. The case went cold. Forsyth County declared the matter closed. Accidental fall, the final word. But then, in 2020, in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the global protests for racial justice, Tamla's story exploded online. Black Lives Matter activists began sharing her photo. Influencers began tagging #JusticeForTamla. Celebrities, like T.I. and 50 Cent, reposted the case. Millions of people, most who had never heard of it, suddenly demanded answers. Why did a black woman die under suspicious circumstances at an all-white sleepover, and no one was ever charged? Why did the police accept witness statements without challenge? Why was the scene not treated like a possible homicide from the start? Why did a former law enforcement officer tamper with records? Why did so much evidence disappear? The pressure became unbearable for the local authorities. Eventually, they had no choice. In June 2020, the case was officially reopened by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI. But again, time had passed. Key forensic evidence had been lost. Statements were stale. Witnesses were coached. Surveillance was gone. And those who were at the party? Lawyered up, the GBI reviewed what was left. For months, Tamla's family waited, hoped, prayed. But in July 2021, they were told the same thing again. No criminal charges will be filed. They were devastated, but not surprised. Tamla Horsford's death remains one of the most controversial cases in Georgia history. Officially, still ruled as an accident. Unofficially, a case many believe is a cover-up wrapped in race, power, and privilege. Forsyth County has a long and painful racial history. In 1912, every black family was forcibly driven out in one of the largest acts of racial cleansing in American history. For decades afterward, it remained nearly all white, proud of it. And though times had changed by 2018, the undercurrent of exclusion still ran through its neighborhoods. Tamla's family, her husband Leander, her 5 sons, still live with the questions, still see her face, still wonder how a joyful night turned into the nightmare they'll never wake from. They describe her not just as a mother, but a force. She was the family's sun, the one who gave more than she had, the one who was always laughing, always dancing, always alive, until she wasn't, and still, no one has been held accountable. Tamla Horsford was the kind of mother who showed up, loud, loving, and impossible to ignore in the best way. She was the mom who cheered the loudest on the sidelines, who brought snacks for every kid, even if she wasn't the team mom, who stayed up until 2 a.m. helping with a school project, and still found the energy to dance while packing lunches. She was 40 years old, a wife, a mother to 5 boys, and the kind of woman who made friends easily. She had a booming laugh, quick wit, and a face that lit up every photo she was in. Born in the Caribbean and raised in Florida, Tamla carried a lightness with her. Even after moving to Georgia, even when surrounded by people who didn't look like her, being the only black woman at the party didn't faze her. That night, November 3rd, 2018, was supposed to be fun. A pajama party. A birthday for her friend Jean Myers. A night to let loose. No husbands. No responsibilities. Just wine, gossip, and laughter. The house in Cumming, Georgia was warm and polished, nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, and perfect for hosting. It had a large kitchen, a finished basement, and a wooden deck that opened up to a backyard that sloped gently into the trees. The women arrived in waves, most of them white, most of them friends from the kids' football league or the neighborhood association. By 8:30 p.m., the kitchen was full of chatter. Bottles of tequila and vodka sat on the counter. Cheese platters and chips disappeared fast. Music drifted from someone's phone. A fire pit glowed out back. Tamla arrived wearing a white onesie covered in paw prints. It was cute, cozy, and made everyone laugh. She hugged people instantly, cracked jokes, and settled into the couch with a drink. The women played cards against humanity. They took selfies. They posted clips to Snapchat. In every shot, Tamla is smiling, leaning in, eyes bright. Someone later said, she was the life of the party. No drama, just joy. By midnight, a few women had left. Others had passed out in guest bedrooms or were tucked into blankets in the living room. Tamla was still up, watching a football game, texting her stepdaughter, sipping from a red cup. She had eaten gumbo earlier, then switched to tequila. She wasn't slurring or stumbling. Her texts were cleared. At 1:47 a.m., Tamla messaged her stepdaughter, "Love you." It was the last text she would ever send, according to the party guests. Tamla went outside around 1:50 a.m. to have a final cigarette on the back deck. She never came back. At 7:30 a.m., Jean Myers' aunt, Madeline Lombardi, said she spotted Tamla's body in the backyard through the basement window. She woke Jean's boyfriend, Jose Barrera, a former probation officer. He walked outside, looked at her body, and then went back inside to make the 911 call. It was 8:59 M.911 call. Jose, we had people over last night. We were drinking. Most of us went to bed. One of them stayed on the balcony. She's not moving. She's stiff. I don't know if she fell. Dispatcher, is she breathing? Jose, I checked. She's not. She's gone. The paramedics who arrived described Tamla lying face down in the grass. Her arms were straight down, palms up. Her face was bloodied. Her wrist was twisted unnaturally. She wasn't wearing shoes. The grass around her was undisturbed. The official police report claimed that Tamla had likely fallen from the second-story deck, a height of approximately 14 feet, while intoxicated. The autopsy by the Forsyth County medical examiner listed multiple blunt force injuries and the cause of death as accidental. But from the beginning, things didn't feel right. Tamla's husband, Leander, was stunned when he saw her body. That wasn't a fall, he said later. That looked like someone did something to her. He wasn't alone in his suspicions. Tamla's best friend, Michelle Graves, began asking questions immediately about the scene, about the timing, about the people at the party. She spoke out publicly, challenging the narrative. And almost overnight, the women who had been at the party, women Michelle had known for years, turned cold. Jean stopped returning calls. So did Jose. So did everyone else. Then came the strange details. The injuries. Tamla had abrasions on her face, arms, and legs, inconsistent with a simple fall. A cut on her wrist looked defensive. Her heart showed internal bleeding. Her second autopsy, performed independently, stated that homicide cannot be ruled out. The positioning of her body, face down, with palms up, arms straight. No grass stains on her clothes. No dirt or debris in her wounds. No sign that she had rolled or tumbled. The timing of the 911 call. Why wait 90 minutes after she was first spotted? Why was her body described as stiff, suggesting rigor mortis, just 6 hours after her last text? The guest statements, all nearly identical. All claimed not to have heard anything. All said Tamla had been fine. The deleted security footage. Jean's home had cameras. Most of the footage from that night was mysteriously unavailable. The 911 caller. Jose Barrera used his law enforcement credentials to access the incident report days later, without authorization. He was fired shortly after. All of this. And yet, the case was closed. Forsyth County ruled Tamla's death an accident. No charges. No arrests. No further investigation. But Tamla's friends and family didn't stop. By the fall of 2019, the official case was closed, but Tamla's name had begun to travel. First quietly, through grief circles and Black Mothers forums, then loudly across digital platforms. It started as whispers. Have you heard about the woman who died at a sleepover? Then it grew. There were 10 people in that house, and no one saw a thing? Then came the hashtag. Hashtag Justice for Tamla. It caught fire in waves. First, TikTok videos. Then Twitter threads. Influencers and activists began reposting the details. The fact that Tamla was the only Black woman at a party full of white women. That her death had been declared an accident within 48 hours, before the autopsy was even complete. That a man with law enforcement ties was the one who found her and accessed her files. That injuries on her face, wrist, and heart didn't align with a simple fall. That no cameras were working and no one could explain WHY.IT was too clean, too quick, too easy to believe that nothing more had happened. Tamla's photo, a glowing portrait of her in red lipstick, laughing wide, framed by natural curls, began circulating online. With it came the caption, Tamla Horsford went to a slumber party and never came home. 10 witnesses. 1 Black woman. No charges. The timing was critical. In May 2020, the world watched the murder of George Floyd. His name, his breath, his image became symbols of what generations of Black Americans had already known. That justice in America is not colorblind. It was in that summer surge, amid protests, activism, and reawakened outrage, that Tamla's story roared back in a national focus. Celebrities amplified her name. I posted, "This doesn't sit right with my soul. Justice for Tamla Horsford." 50 Cent reposted the case details. Gabrielle Union shared her photo with the words, "She mattered. She still does." Petitions were signed. Over 750,000 people demanded the case be reopened. Under massive public pressure, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, finally agreed. In June 2020, they confirmed it. Tamla Horsford's case was officially reopened. Tamla's family was hopeful, but cautious. They had already lived through disappointment once. Leander, her husband, spoke rarely in public, but when he did, his voice was layered with exhaustion. "We want the truth, whatever it is, but I'll be damned if I let this disappear." The GBI began reviewing everything from scratch. The 911 calls, the autopsy reports, the photographs, the toxicology. They re-interviewed key witnesses. But many of those witnesses now had lawyers. Their answers were tighter, less revealing. The GBI requested any remaining security footage, phone logs, and social media posts from that night. But so much had already vanished. Cameras malfunctioned. Phones had been wiped. Snapchats had expired. A crucial sliver of time, between 1:50 a.m. and 8:59 a.m., was a blank stretch, and that's where the suspicion sat like a splinter. Because if Tamla had died from a fall, why wasn't she found until morning? Why were so many people in that house, yet none saw or heard her go down? Why was her death pronounced with such speed, and why did law enforcement rush to close the case? The GBI didn't say much, but their silence became its own answer. In July 2021, after more than a year of reinvestigation, the GBI issued its findings. No new charges would be filed. Their conclusion was nearly identical to the original. Tamla had fallen. There was alcohol. There was no evidence of foul play. The rage that followed was volcanic. Online, people responded with disbelief. So a Black woman can die suspiciously at a party, and everyone walks. This is Emmett Till energy with yoga pants. Imagine if she had been white and the rest had been black. Would they have closed it in 2 days? Tamla's death had become more than a tragedy. It had become a mirror, and that mirror stretched back decades. Forsyth County, Georgia, was not just another southern suburb. In 1912, the entire black population, over 1,000 people, had been violently driven out by mobs in one of the largest acts of racial cleansing in American history. Black families were lynched, homes burned, churches bombed, signs were posted warning, "NS don't let the sun set on you here." For nearly 75 years, Forsyth remained nearly all white. Oprah herself came there in 1987 to report on the tension and was screamed at by white supremacists on national TV. By 2018, things had changed on the surface. Schools were integrated, neighborhoods were mixed, but the undercurrent remained. Many black residents still whispered about unspoken lines, the neighborhoods they avoided, the stores that watched them too closely, the way police seemed to treat them with sharper eyes. Tamla's death, and the failure to investigate it fully, felt like an echo, not just of injustice, but of something far older, something baked into the ground itself. And still, the family remained. Leander raised their boys. Tamla's mother visited her grave weekly. Her best friend Michelle still posts her photo every November. On the anniversary of her death, her children gathered in silence, lit candles, and told stories about the way she danced, the way she cursed when she stubbed her toe, the way she smelled like coconut and love. Their grief is quiet now. Quieter than the hashtags, but no less fierce. They do not want revenge. They want answers. And the truth, whatever it is, refuses to speak. There is a photograph of Tamla Horsford that her family never stopped sharing as she's sitting on a couch, one leg tucked under her, mid-laugh. Her eyes are nearly closed from smiling, her arms stretched wide, as if in the middle of telling a story that's already funny before it ends. She looks warm, alive, like someone who fills a room, not just with noise, but with color. That's the image they want the world to remember, not the bruises, not the questions, not the backyard, but the woman, Tam, as her husband called her, mommy to 5 boys, best friend, sister, sunshine and sneakers. After the GBI closed the case for a second time, her family took a long breath, not of relief, but of grief layered in exhaustion. They had fought for years. They had exhumed her body, read the autopsy reports line by line, met with lawyers, given interviews, endured suspicion, and answered questions the state never asked, and still, no one had been held accountable. No arrests, no apologies, no final word. The women who were at the party have moved on with their lives. They rarely speak publicly. Some deleted social media. Others maintain silence. In public records, there is no suggestion of criminal charges. But in the public eye, their names remain linked to a question that refuses to fade. What really happened to Tamla Horsford? Was it a fall? Or was it something worse? Tamla's legacy didn't vanish with the case. It grew. Her name has been used in documentaries, college lectures, activist panels. Her face is included in murals alongside Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, and other black women whose lives ended in mystery or state violence. But her story is also more private. It lives in the quiet ache of 5 sons growing up without their mother. It lives in the way her husband still pauses when the phone rings in the morning. It lives in the way her mother lights a candle in the kitchen every November, just one, near the window, because despite all the press, the hashtags, and the outrage, Tamla's death remains a deeply human loss. A life stolen, not just from the world, but from the people who loved her most. There is no resolution. Only a legacy. A legacy of a woman who walked into a party and never walked out. A woman who laughed until she couldn't. A woman who was told she mattered and then buried without justice, but not without memory, because some stories don't end. They echo, and Tamla Horsford's name is still echoing through Georgia, through mothers, through the justice system, through all the nights when someone whispers, "This doesn't feel right." And maybe, one day, the truth will finally answer.